Being on the list means that NASA employees no longer have the same protections under U.S. federal labor laws. Union rights have been stripped away, meaning that collective bargaining and negotiations regarding potential cuts will now not be possible under the order. Goddamn budget. Unions are an extortion vehicle that have a past they no longer follow. Let me play devil's advocate. Is the company or the corporation not also an extortion vehicle in that case? Do you think that they pay everybody a fair price for their labor, or do you think that they're looking to pay them the least amount as possible and also extorting people? You can leave the company and you don't have to join the union. What's your argument there? Just playing devil's advocate here, because you made a very... If you don't like what you are being paid, you can leave. Yes. And if you don't like what the union represents or does, you don't have to join the union. You're making it seem like if you work there and there's a union, you must be part of the union or something. Literally just having a converation here. I'm just playing devil's advocate with you. If unions are so bad, why are Amazon and Starbucks and company putting so much effort into illegal anti-union activities? I literally, how are you going to twist what I said and make it seem like I'm saying unions are bad? Somebody made a statement in chat and it's regarding this, and I'm playing devil's advocate. Individuals who do have the choice to stay out of the union doesn't change that they are extorting now and now based on their original cause. Wait, but that sidestepped what I said. I said, are you willing to also say that if the unions are extortion, or use extortion as a tool, would you not also say that the corporations do the same? Because they tell you, you have to do something or we fire you. Also, we pay the minimum amount despite, it doesn't matter how much money we make, you don't share in those profits. Therefore, you're being exploited because you're not getting paid fairly, compensated fairly for your work. Like, I'm asking you the question. I'm really curious. Don't worry. I'll flip this around from being a blue-haired liberal to being a fucking MAGA guy in a second, but I'm really curious. Again, not here to make a statement about are unions good or bad. I'm directly rebutting what you said as a devil's advocate, and I'm just curious. Now, for those of you guys that are always in support of unions, I also look at it this way. I'm going to flip the script and go full fucking right-wing MAGA. You guys are huge union supporters. Does that include the police union? That's why I always say, I like to have these fun conversations. I hear a lot of people say, and again, this isn't my personal opinion, but I just noticed, I observe things. You know, we got to get rid of the police unions. They're too strong. They have too much power. They have whatever this is. The police unions protect them and they allow them to get away with all this stuff. It's like, all right, but we're pro-union, right? Well, that's different. It's like, but wait, aren't you for the stronger the union, the better? And again, it's always this weird thing, not to start shit in here, but I see that a lot. I'm not an anti-union guy at all. Like I think that there's positives and negatives for a lot of things there. Take putting words in leftists' mouths. Well, as you're pretty much a leftist in here, and things you put in your mouth I probably wouldn't agree with, but what I'm getting at is that I didn't put it in any way. I'm literally saying what some people think. You're actually painting a broader stroke than I am. You're saying I'm putting it in everybody's mouth. I'm not. Your mom's, yes. But what I'm saying is that this is an argument that I see. A lot of people will be this in that way. And it's a great thing that we have that because it puts things into perspective. I really do like to play these devil's advocate things, not in a hope of stirring up shit, but because it's a good way of looking at perspectives. And I think perspectives really help us, not in the political sense so much as in the economic stance as well. Now, as far as unions and the economy, right? It's like Reddit, right? Like we talk about Reddit, like as the changes that have happened in Reddit over the past 5 years, as a user, I hate. As an investor, I like, right? It's similar when you look at, unions. Most people's opinions on unions are what they've been told unions are, good or bad, right? And you'll see that. People are told by let's say Fox that unions are trying to do this, and they'll bring up Jimmy Hoffa. They'll talk about ties to the mob. They'll talk about unions going on strike and shutting down businesses, and then or for example the railway or the rail car builders that went on a strike in Ohio, and then what happened is that the company just picked up and moved down to Texas, and then everybody lost their job, and they'll be like, see, that's why unions are bad. That's an easy point to look at. You can do the flip side too and talk about, how unionized workers generally tend to have better pay, better health care, better negotiations at the table. And, if it's crazy. If you're not one that has to deal with that, it's easier to have an opinion. So, everybody's going to have their opinion. Everyone's going to have their opinion. But don't get it twisted that corporations they spend a lot of money. They actually sometimes spend more money on trying to stop the organization of a union than they would most likely pay from a collective bargaining agreement. And it's never one of those things where it's an easy case. I worked in hotels in South Florida. The problem with some of those hotels is that they had small unions but they didn't have enough people to join them, so they ended up losing out. But the ones that got bigger ones that were enough members that they couldn't replace them, they were making 1.5 times more than the hotel next door. And their hotel didn't shut down. They didn't lose any profits. They didn't do anything, right? And actually some of the workers retained longer there. They had less turnover and they ended up spending less money on payroll. So it can, again, you can look at it a lot of different sides. I mean, there's a lot of ways of looking at it. But the idea that, we're getting off topic here, okay? I don't think you working for a company that you contract with based on the knowledge when you take the job. Unions are merely grabbing to gain more from the companies. If you want to have more say in the corporate profits, then you need to also take the risk and downside. So if a company loses money and starts cutting jobs and you get your job cut because of something else, don't you take that risk and downside immediately? Not only that, but the company wants you to give them a 2-week notice before you quit so they can find a replacement, but you don't get a 2-week heads up that you're getting fired so you can find another job. So what are you talking about? The risk and downside. So when workers are on the hook for the debt or a failing company, then you can talk about workers sharing profits. This is what the left doesn't understand. They make the argument workers built but share no risk. How is losing your job not a risk? I'm not even trying to sound like a fucking, fucking septum wearing blue ring fucking or blue haired fucking sandal wearing fucking libtard or whatever you want to call him, but you're literally making the argument too easy. Like, you're hurting yourself. You think you're powering your argument, you're actually making it worse. You just said that why should the employees get to profit share if they take none of the risk? Excuse me, you missed the point. If the company, let me ask you this: 2008, when the banks collapsed and millions of people lost their jobs, how many of the CEOs lost their job? How many of those CEOs got millions and millions and millions of dollars of bonuses? So what you're saying is that the companies not only got bailed out, but also got hundreds of millions of dollars in bonuses, but the workers all lost their job and got nothing in return. What does that mean? Losing a job is not the same thing as losing your invested equity. If you lose your house and someone else is on the loan, what did you lose a house? Poor you. Oh, I think you crashed out. I think you crashed out. I actually think you crashed out. You just lost it. You just went somewhere else about homes and loans and shit like that. I'm talking about the business. I wasn't even here to make an argument for unions, but you've literally just done it. Like, that was wild. I'm not a lefty. I'm not a righty or lefty or anything like that. But here's the thing. People that are considered left or right, they get fed what to believe by talking points and don't actually understand the numerical data that's involved with this. And so they're just repeating someone else's point. And then once you start getting into the numbers, they start crashing out on both sides of the aisle. It's so easy because they don't. That's why I like to explain things to you guys and tell you, you can actually use this in defense or an argument on whatever you're doing as long as you have the knowledge. Even if the numbers are against your, go against your narrative, you can still use it because the other person doesn't dive that deep. Like, legitimately, somebody saying, hey, the workers take none of the risk. I don't know how you can come to that conclusion.
Oak Pizza Hut 420 has gifted
You're literally taking all the risk. Here's how you do this. Watch this. Does anybody know how much, based on GDP, the average worker's productivity earns per hour in America across the board? Average hour worked, how much money that produces? About $60 to $70. That's on average. It may be higher now. I haven't even looked at the numbers in a year. Productivity's up, wages are up, but the gap is still huge there. So when you look at somebody and you say, well, this is how much they are owed per hour, but then you look and see that the productivity and how much they make, they actually make $70 per hour, but they're paid $18 an hour. Obviously, you have to minus for overhead and cap on the, for expenses and shit like that, insurance and payroll, which is a huge fucking thing for a corporation and stuff like that. But when you look at it, if that profit margin between the hours earned or hourly pay and productivity is above 10%, you're kind of exploiting the worker. Well, they voluntarily signed up for it. Well, of course they did. They needed work, and you exploited the fact that there was a big need and that you could bottom barrel it. Now, if you were barely running a margin of 1%, right? And I'm not talking about adjusted EBITDA. You're a corporation. You're running a 1% margin. Then I absolutely get it. Small businesses, local bakeries, whatever it is. You're running a 1%, and I don't mean adjusted EBITDA. I don't mean where you're taking out the fucking expenses, especially when your expenses are fucking crazy, whether it's buybacks, whether it's debt pay downs on future, whatever. I'm talking about just straight up. If your margin, if you're running a 10% or higher margin, if there's a 10% or higher difference between what the profit per hour on somebody's working is and their hourly pay, you're probably exploiting them. Now, Again, it's a voluntary contract. I'm not saying it's illegal in any way. I'm actually saying, fuck it. If I was a business owner, I'd try to save money too, right? Like, it is what it is. I'm not even disagreeing. But don't be intellectually dishonest with yourself and saying that there's no risk to the worker, that the corporation assumes all the risk. No, they don't. No, they don't. So that was my only point. No, this isn't me doing a political take. This is me responding to a certain individual's incorrect statement or highly biased statement that didn't take into account any numerical values, any empirical data or anything, and just said a blanket statement that actually sounded really stupid and then didn't understand. So now I'm explaining it to them of where they're missing the point. This isn't a unions are good, corporations are bad, or vice versa. This is just simply trying to educate somebody so the next time they crash out, they don't sound as dumb as they just did. That's why I tell you guys, please stop parroting everything you hear and come up and actually deep dive into it. Even if it's something that the numbers show something different, at least have the data there. So why need a union? If the amount of people make is only a fraction, then everyone refuse to work there. Problem solved, and they will raise it. Well, I mean, we wouldn't need to worry about, accidents if everybody would just stop drinking and driving and checking their phone. Let's just put a big sign up and tell everybody, hey, stop texting and driving and stop drinking and driving. Jesus, you know how cheap insurance would get? Everybody just needs to stop doing it. So you're making excuses for them? You're making the same argument of, hey, girls would stop getting assaulted if they would just stop wearing miniskirts. That's the same argument, well, maybe it's not the same argument, but very close to the argument you're making. Well, corporations wouldn't take advantage of workers if they would just stop working. Then they would be forced to be better. I'm not even a fucking pro-union or liberal or whatever you want to call. I'm just explaining how it works. Like, this is just how it works. You can make an argument. Here's an argument against minimum wage increases. Does anybody here know how many people in America actually get paid minimum wage? Let me make sure I have the right number. 1.1% of hourly workers are paid the minimum wage. Now, guess what? There are people in this chat who are against the federal minimum wage being increased and for it. And both y'all learned something today. Does that mean that we, whatever? But the idea is that people are saying, oh my God, the federal minimum wage is only whatever like this. It's got to be increased because it's not a standard, it doesn't give a living or whatever like that. 1% of people make that. So the argument, I think, is misunderstanding. Nobody's really making it. And increase the federal minimum wage helps in the short term, but then makes those people even poorer because what happens is then there's a sudden influx of money. Those people become better standard of living for a short period of time, but then there's more money flowing into that area, and that raises prices, and then they get shut right back down, and then it actually becomes even bigger of a gap, right? Because everybody wants to focus on the minimum wage thing. Like, sure, there's something to be talked about there, but it's not like 50% of the country is making $7 an hour. 1% of people, it's still a lot, but it's 1%. The idea is that it's not the minimum wage, it's the corporations or the companies not paying enough to certain people. And why? Then there's another argument of, are they exploiting it? Is it because these are unskilled workers and there's a flood of them, so it's a supply and demand issue? There's a lot of other conversations there. But having that data is a good starting point. That's why I said the federal minimum wage being jumped up to $15 would actually wreck more economies than it would fix if you did it overnight like that. Again, there's cost of living associated. There's states. There's localities. There's different different factors that go into that. But it's not for me to tell you what is best. I think you're a grown adult. You can figure out this or do the research on your own. But understand that when you start a baseline argument of something like that, have the numbers there because it'll help you out. That's still 3.5 million people. And again, this is what I love about being on Twitch. I can hear somebody literally say, bro, that's 3.5 million people. This person thinks that all 350 million people in this country are actively working. Babies, 95-year-old geriatric patients. He thinks they're all working. So when I say 1% of workers are making 1%, this person jumps in and goes, bro, that's 3.5 million people. And then I know that that's why it's important to have this data out there. But again, this is not, you guys are angry because I'm giving you these. It's not that it has to fit your narrative. You can use that in accordance with your narrative as well. Just have the knowledge. Because guess what? Let's say you're the biggest leftist out there and you are somebody who's a huge supporter of raising the federal minimum wage to 10, 15, 20, 100, whatever, doesn't matter. You got an argument. But the moment somebody that's arguing against you says, do you even know how many people in America are making the minimum wage? That's a way that somebody can stun lock you. No, but it doesn't matter. And then they come back and they say, it's actually about 1.1%. Generally, about 900,000 people. Less than 1%. You want to make a giant economic change and essentially and then you're lost. But now, the moment somebody says it, you're like, yeah, about 1%. Doesn't sound like a lot, but we're talking about about 1 million people? So you're telling me 1 million people deserve to live on the streets and be homeless or not have to be able to live because they can't afford, because corporations that have a fucking McDonald's who made $228 billion last year can't afford to give them a fucking dollar? Is that what you're... See, you get to counter back. Help you out. Or if you're on the right and you want to fucking shut down one of them goddamn libs, say less than 1% of people. This is what you want to focus on. I got you guys. I'm ready to get you guys in fist fights everywhere. The truth is that you don't even need a minimum wage anymore. Did y'all see that video of that guy in China that was remote using the robot to put groceries in the grocery store, making $3.25 an hour? And they're literally just doing the technology till they can get far enough range to get people in like a third world country to do it for 50 cents an hour. I appreciate you telling us different perspectives on our economic beliefs. Can you tell me if having billionaires and 100 millionaires shouldn't be allowed to happen? Sir, you're a big boy or girl. You can decide if you think it's good enough, if people should or shouldn't be able to do it. I think there's an argument in a lot of cases for should something be allowed to happen, or is it the system we have that makes it happen? And should we cap people at a certain amount? Should we tell people that they can only get certain amount or they can get certain amount? I think the real question is that instead of asking me a very, very, very loaded question that doesn't have an easy answer, which you basically want a yes or no, and it's not that easy, you should probably just say something like, Stocky, how do we allow people to, get this way, and then have other people that don't have any money? Why is that allowed to happen? Is there a fix for it? And the question is, are you upset that somebody has a lot of money, or are you upset that there are people that have a lot and there are people that have nothing? That's always the question. I can't answer that for you, but is it about, it doesn't seem fair? Is it that these people the government is giving these people a pass and they should be taking more and then giving it to people with less? I mean, that's a very complex question. There's no such thing as an easy answer in finance and economics. But if you raise minimum wage, everyone that was getting paid above that now wants a raise, so it doesn't just affect the 1%. It's not even about everybody wanting a raise. What happens is, let me explain how this happens. There's a difference between federal, state, and local, okay? Because these are different economies. These are different economies. It's very, very important. For example, the GDP of California versus the GDP of, New Hampshire, right? Big difference. Go to the state level. The amount of money and cost of living, okay, let's say cost of living here and here. Cost of living in, LA versus some shit town in the middle of the fucking mountains in North California, very big. Or LA County and some county up here. And then cost of downtown LA or on the beach in LA versus the fucking South Central. So federal, state, and local, right? Big difference. Now, here's the thing though. What people don't understand is they say raise the minimum wage. Okay. So if you have a scale of people, right, you have certain levels of people that work and they make this amount of money, right, and it goes up like this. The idea is that we raise the minimum wage. Well, only 1% of people actually make the minimum wage. So it's not that large amount of people. A lot of people are on the low levels, right? This is like the lower income levels. But the actual minimum wage isn't that much. Again, as that person was alluding to, if you raise the minimum wage, well, now the people that are making minimum wage amount of money are making what the next level up are making. So what happens is now people that were skilled or making more money are at the next level are now at the same level. That's what that person's argument is. And they're saying everyone wants a raise after that, which will just cause it. That's not what we're talking about. What I'm talking about is if you do an increase here, what happens is in the short term, you will raise their standard of living. They will have more purchasing power. So now they can actually afford to have a small apartment or pay their groceries and stuff like that, which is a good thing. We want that to happen. The problem is that in an economy, whether it's a local, state, or federal level, what happens is that money now flows into the economy, the local or the state economy. The people that are here that own businesses will now have more customers with more money. And what does supply and demand do? In the short term, these people can raise their standard of living. They can afford things more. They can afford more items. They can afford more housing and things that we want to happen. But it's very simple. Supply and demand kicks over. The prices of those things now go up for everyone. So if the price to buy that was here, they couldn't afford it. Now they can. Guess what? Now everyone's income decreases a little bit, or their purchasing power decreases, and you get yourself right back to the same situation. This isn't some right-wing fucking, this is just how economics work. This isn't a political thing. So for those of you guys that are like getting upset about it, it's not. This is how supply and demand. Don't get me started in the government and their fucking printing of money as well. I'm talking about localized economies, state economies, whatever. When you do that, now at the federal level, you're going to cause a lot of problems because now everyone across the board has this very big increase and you're going to wreck local economies very badly. But like at the state level, This is the concern. This is the concern. I'm not saying it's always going to happen. There's always, again, for anybody who's about to jump in here and say, well, that's why we need price control. And that's a whole other conversation. Okay. I'm explaining what that person was saying, how that affects this. Okay. Minimum wage increases, especially only 1%, but minimum wage increases do give a short-term increase in the standard of living and the purchasing power for lower income people. But it ends up raising it above, and you just put them right back under where. So it's a perpetual thing. That's why my plan as your unelected president of the United States or your secretary of treasury before I'm assassinated for making too much sense is on the back end. Same thing that I talked about when I had Brian Deese, the former National Economic Council chair here, about when Harris, right? Because we were talking about Harris right towards the election. I asked him, I said, this whole $45,000 in credits for first-time home buyers, all that's going to do is the same fucking thing. The first few new homeowners, first-time home buyers, are going to have this big credit that's going to allow them to get into homes for a little bit cheaper. But then, what's the comp set going to do? Well, there's buyers now with more money. So now it raises the price not only for them to keep them in line with that extra bump, but everyone else who doesn't get to take advantage of it now sees these houses that they want to buy go up even higher. We think short term. We think these easy things that fix it, but we don't think about how that works in economics. So if you give a whole new batch of people an extra $40,000 in credits towards first-time homeowner, sure, you're going to help the first few of them. And as they go to the market, they're going to be able to buy houses now. But now those houses that were not for sale or barely selling are now selling and selling for higher amounts. So what does everybody do? What does the price do? You base it off of the last sell. They all go up because now we know there's a new group of people with more money that are going to be able to afford it. So we're bringing it up and it prices everybody out. That changes. I asked him, I said, if you really wanted to do this, why aren't you doing it on the back end? Not on the actual purchase of the house, but the savings on the back end, whether it's giving a credit to the state to lower their state taxes or their property taxes, giving them a reprieve on a federal program that has lowers their interest rate on their loan or gives a credit or something for several years that gives them that $40,000 later on. Not on the purchase of the house, on the back end, something else. So that way, they're not able to, it's not that they're able to purchase a more expensive home with a big credit because now you get this influx of money on the front end. You're able to entice first-time homeowners by something that doesn't affect everyone else, but does help them on the back end. So they're still having to purchase the price at the similar market value without increasing the supply of money, right? So that's why my idea is instead of tax cuts across the board, I've said, is to increase the standardized deduction on taxes. In my opinion, that's the single best, if you had to stroke a brushstroke, of giving more purchasing power to people with less money and increasing the quality, the standard of living, and the purchasing power of people with less money. You give the same amount of tax credit, less tax obligations across the board. So anybody making $10,000 or $10 million a year gets the same amount of money off, but that extra $3,000 or $4,000 standardized deduction that people making under $20,000, $30,000, the amount of purchasing power that it gives to them directly is so much more. Because if I give 1% or if I give 10% tax cut across the board, somebody that's down here gets, they get 10%, but everyone else gets that 10% too. Somebody's making $10 million or $1 million. Standardized deduction, basically instead of top down, it's bottom up. So you're still giving those people more money, but because that amount of money is so much more impactful to them, it allows that to go up without forcing anybody to raise prices. And it scales, right? It's not across the board. It scales. So instead of everybody getting a sudden influx of $20,000, it's these people down here get an extra $3K, these people get an extra $2K, $1K, $100. So it scales rather than doing like a universal thing where you just dump money for everybody. Now it scales up. And so everyone gets a little increase, but some people are getting increased higher, and it kind of helps drive that up. Stroke poor people from the back end? No, god damn it. You can't. That hole's been worn out if they've been poor long enough.